Hey there, welcome to episode 59 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo, enjoying a head cold. That will become apparent at some point. I've been spending the last day blowing my nose. This morning it progressed into a very mild cough, mostly productive coughing the end of the head cold, I think. So feeling much better. Hopefully my voice will survive this episode. Been generally improving. I can already feel I need to take a break, and yes. But anyway, we'll see how things go. But today, recording this at 1:36 p.m. on Christmas Day. If you celebrate Christmas, congratulations. Festivus was the other day, Boxing Day, and Kwanzaa tomorrow. Hanukkah this evening. Surely there are more. I wonder if that plumbing noise is making it through. Well, let me pause for a sec. All right, hopefully a little bit better. So yeah, it's about 1:38 now on the 25th. So yeah, hopefully you're enjoying your holidays. If you're listening to this during your holidays, maybe you aren't. I fully expect people to listen after. If you're not familiar with the quaggling sand concept, quaggling sand was a term I coined when I was very young. I don't know exactly when, but call it like 4 years old maybe, give or take. You probably call it pins and needles, quaggling sand. It's a show, it's an audio program where each episode is a story or some sort of reflection on something, sort of like sand getting stirred up. Hopefully there's something meaningful at the end. Hopefully it'll be worth listening to. And if not, there's always next week. This episode, coming at you for the holidays, Hypocognition. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes. Within you will read, or I will read to you, the summary of today's episode. There are some links to shameless self-promotion and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that correct? 5 somewhat relevant links for today's episode. So let's get on with it so you can get back to whatever it is you're doing for the holidays. Summary of today's episode. Do you know what hypocognition is? And have you ever experienced it? Well, if you don't, you are. And if you do, you aren't. Actually, whether you know what it is or not, you have surely experienced it. What is more interesting is what do you do about it, or what you did about it. The links for today's episode, let's begin with the two, buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo, ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. Buy Me a Coffee, I do now have the Buy Me an Update micro episode. It's under 5 minutes. Quick rundown on what happened last week and what's coming up. So there's been, is it 5 total? Episode 0 plus 1, 2, 3, 4. That's how counting works. Yep. I am continue to amaze, right? Buy Me an Update. Oh, episode 5 was published on Monday. So 6 total. Episode 0 is usually an intro, so it doesn't really count, but there it is. So buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo. Right at the top of the profile page, there's a link to the posts section where audio posts are. Buy Me a Coffee allows for publishing directly audio clips and other things. Who knew? By the way, no obligation to spend any money. ko-fi.com/DanHugo. ko-fi.com/DanHugo. Better for text updates, which I've done here and there. Still working out how to use these platforms to their utmost. They are commonly used by creators, by open source developers, and so on. So I fit into that group, at least one of them. So yeah, check it out. I do have links on buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo to all of my audio programs, various GitHub projects, other such things. So I'll see if I can make that more interesting. Why Ignorance Fails to Recognize Itself by David Dunning. It's a YouTube video. Dunning-Kruger, you probably know what that is, or you think you do. That's a little humor. It was actually a pretty good presentation, pretty brief. He does talk about hypocognition right at the beginning, and then towards the end when he kind of does a little callback. You could argue it's sprinkled in throughout his presentation. Dunning-Kruger effect. He does mention in this video that he did not name the Dunning-Kruger effect for himself and his research partner. That came later by someone else. And he makes a little joke about being happy to have his surname associated with people who don't know what they're talking about. Frederick Tudor is mentioned in the very beginning of the talk and then later in relation to hypocognition. Frederick Tudor was a big ice guy, as in frozen water, not ice of today, which probably has a completely different meaning, but ice is still frozen water. Frederick Tudor, entrepreneur in the early 1800s in the U.S. Hypocognition, there's a Wikipedia page for it. You can read all about it. Je ne sais quoi is a French term which kind of aligns. It's not the exact same meaning, but it is essentially hypocognition, sort of. Je ne sais quoi is that certain I don't know what. I can't think of a word to describe what it is, but there it is. So I have a Merriam-Webster dictionary link to je ne sais quoi. De Broglie, The Birth of a Word. This is tangentially related, but it is one of my favorite TED Talks of all time. It is fascinating to watch. The ending is particularly interesting, but the whole thing is really quite good. And we are talking about words, apropos. I have no words, though. Speaking of, hypocognition is basically not knowing how to describe something or what is being described. That is, like the meaning of that word, for example, hypocognition. If you were unaware of what hypocognition means, you would not know what it is. And if you know what it means, not to be able to express a notion of express a notion or connect a concept to a word to describe it, you may not have known that there is a word for that. So did I say that correctly? Because I left out a word. And if you don't know what it means, that didn't really come out right. I don't know who writes this material for me. He's probably a big dork. So essentially, if you don't know that there's a word for it, you wouldn't know that there's a word for it. If you don't know what it is that you're trying to describe. And this is the crux of the beginning of the David Dunning presentation, whether a culture has a culture in a temperate climate has a word for ice. This becomes a real problem if you find yourself at the other end of a stream of jargon that you are expected to know or at least be familiar with. And by the way, this is a large part of the David Dunning presentation, is people believing that they are familiar with terms that don't actually exist. You may even be expected to respond to the jargon. If I asked you if your computer is configured with CC NUMA, you might not have been expecting to need to know that. What is that? What is this you're asking me? Much less understanding it well enough to assess your own computer hardware configuration. CC NUMA, by the way, is kind of an acronym, an abbreviation for Cache Coherent Non-Uniform Memory Architecture, CC NUMA. So did you know that such a term existed or that such a thing could have a term associated with it? Maybe not. Multiprocessing machines are probably CC NUMA in the modern era. Multi-core machines, probably CC NUMA. At least the caches, not memory. Anyway, they could be CC NUMA in some cases. At the same time, if you are speaking to someone with authoritative knowledge about something, maybe your vehicle and you need to describe a noise or an unexpected motion or other anomaly, like it pulls to the left, it shimmies, it vibrates when I turn, the brakes squeak. You may not know the specific names of parts nor the best words to describe the behaviors you are encountering. The examples I just gave may not be applicable. And so you must attempt to describe the situation with the barrier of hypocognition in the way. This actually happens all the time. The person who understands your vehicle, some mechanic or a repair person in general, probably will be able to guess what it is once you can identify what it is. So this is where the classic case of let's get in the car and drive around the block and you tell me what, you show me, you let me hear, you point it out, whatever it is. So when the vocabulary fails, the hypocognition gets in the way. Sometimes you just have to hold up an ice cube and say this. By the way, I do have two super brief stories, but today's episode is more just reflection on words. I don't know. This is alleged to be one of the more difficult things for people to say in this form or something similar in whatever language you prefer. It is important, though, to say this, or at least imply it somehow, because it really does not help to be confused or left out of a conversation or presentation if the concepts being discussed fall outside of your personal lexicon. That's your personal dictionary of terms with which you are familiar. Look it up or ask. Like if we were talking in person and I said CC Numa, hopefully you would say, what does that mean? Not just say, yeah. And this is, again, part of David Dunning's presentation is that often people will do the latter. I've actually been in this situation where I missed some brief mention or I give in to the presumption on the part of the presenter that this particular thing is common knowledge. And then later, I find myself not quite certain what that thing was. What is that? What are we talking about? So much easier to just ask. Even if it is at the end of the presentation, you can interrupt though. Excuse me, what is that? And I'll have a little quick story about that. On the other hand, in an academic setting, hey, we're paying to be here. Professors are paid to teach. We should be asking questions all the time. Well, here's that story I thought I had in the next section. We had a particularly brilliant professor from Sri Lanka, Professor Rattajivan, describing Amonix in an 8 a.m. recitation. So it was a classroom full of sophomores. When I say full, I mean probably a dozen, maybe 15. We had a particularly brilliant, he was a brilliant guy, super nice. Absolutely had no problem answering questions. So I could sense I was not alone in the room wondering, what is this thing he just mentioned? I raised my hand and I literally said, can you point to what that is? What is this? What are you saying? What is the word you're using? And he indicated that the word Amonic was indeed, and by the way, that everybody was ready for this. He pointed at a waveform and he said it more slowly. Harmonic. Oh, harmonic. Everybody in the room. Oh, okay. Because he was not associating a thing that we could see. He wasn't pointing at a waveform. A harmonic is a higher frequency or lower frequency sort of alias of a waveform. So harmonics, if you are musical, chord theory, resonance, if you play one tone, you'll hear things that will vibrate at higher tones and so on. So harmonics. This was immediately obvious, and if we had not been bogged down by the pronunciation of the word, we would have been fine. We would have said, "Oh yeah, of course, harmonic." So now we knew, and there were many cases because he had quite an accent, but again, brilliant, very, very, very nice guy. So bye too, costita. There were many of the cosine theta. Real world issues can arise, and this is an example where I pose the question right away. Hey, wait, what are you talking about? Oh, everybody was better for it. We moved on. Nobody was confused. Problem solved. I've encountered similar scenarios, though, in the real world. I cannot tell you how many typos are in the real work. Now I can't type either. Okay, real world. In the workaday world, and while I could go on and on, I will focus on two simple scenarios. These will be brief. While working with Intel, I did work for Intel Corporation. I traveled around quite a bit and worked with many makers and hackathon fans and creative people and innovators, and pick your favorite words. If you know them, with many makers at hackathons to express their creativity through Intel Maker hardware or others in other ways. You didn't have to use Intel hardware sometimes an Intel hackathon maybe, but mostly people were using Arduino and Raspberry Pis because they were easier to use. The documentation for our products was written by people who normally write for professional engineers. And so their presumptions were built around this audience. In fact, it proved remarkably difficult to describe the real-world troubles had by less experienced people who wanted to succeed, who wanted to enjoy their, continuously waking hours of hacking on something at a hackathon. Like, hey, I was up for 5 hours, and 3 of those hours were trying to figure out how your product works. True stories. In fact, it proved remarkably difficult with less experienced people on the ground to describe what they were running into. Right? These are people that are actually using the product, and the feedback I get would be, oh, we have that documented. Everything's fine. All words describing difficulties were tossed out. That is to say, if I said, hey, we're running into this real problem, they said, oh, it's documented. I said, well, I'm not making this up. I'm not trying to keep you busy. I'm telling you what's actually happening. And they didn't believe me. This is not specifically hypocognition, but it is a disconnect around language. So it's sort of in the same neighborhood. But I will say the words in the documentation were maybe too jargony. Again, I'm writing this for someone who's been a hardware engineer for 20 years, and you are a student who is in high school or college, and you have no idea what this documentation is trying to tell you. See ya. The presumption of error was placed on the user, not on the documentation. And they had been doing this for quite a long time. This is how companies like Intel function. I even heard from professional engineers who were in the biz for a while, and they said, this is really difficult to use. They were mostly speaking of the Edison product. Don't worry, you've never heard of it. Here in Vegas, terms like innovate, and this is a different topic now. Here in Vegas, terms like innovation hub and startup scene are tossed about as though these are labels one can hang on a locality like a sign on a storefront. We're open for business. Come on in and innovate with your startup. Hoot. In reality, innovation is not something that can be conjured up like a pizza. And a startup scene, if that it's even a thing, really needs to evolve or emerge if it is going to be sustainable. You cannot simply sprinkle money over a place and say, ta-da, startup scene. You can think you can do that, and it might appear that it sort of works for a minute. Not really. So these terms, innovate, innovation, innovation hub, startup scene, tech scene, they're easy words to use, but they don't necessarily mean what people think they mean. So here's where some hypocognition comes into play, because if you use the same words over and over again, people will begin to believe that they mean something, but they don't really have anything to back that up. So if you use the term like startup scene, oh, there's a startup scene, it may exist. Maybe it will be around for a little while as long as you provide free lunch, but it might be transient. The Vegas population does move around a bit, often outside of Vegas. That's not funny. It's just a fact. If somebody just disappears, you're like, oh, I guess they moved away. And the innovation, well, it's just a word, right? Will not be quite what everybody thinks of as innovation. Come here and have your company do something somewhere else and bring it to Vegas. It's innovation in Vegas. It's a tangled web. But I believe, so this is an example of hypocognition because what's really happening doesn't really have a word. So they tack on familiar terms like, we'll be the next Silicon Valley. That doesn't mean what you think it means. So who can say? Who can say what will happen? There are more examples. I find I often try to precondition some of the things I talk about by using analogies that are more accessible, less jargony. I think interactions with people who speak different languages or who come from different cultures or both can really help here quite a bit. There's something I came up with a while ago. A friend of mine is married to a man from Ecuador. He speaks English quite well, but his family is in Ecuador. So we were talking about this one day, and I said, I have found there's a huge difference between trying to speak to people who speak another language or come from another culture. And by the way, the other culture, they might speak English or they might speak the same language as you. They might be from a different place where different expectations, different common phrases, different uses of terms, separated by a common language, right? So I said, it makes a difference if you proactively want your audience to understand. If you're speaking to an audience of people from Ecuador, I was speaking to my friend here at this time, you may be somewhat interested that they understand what you're saying. And you'll hope that they ask a question, perhaps, or that they'll figure it out. When you're speaking to your family, your husband's family, you actually want to make sure they understand what you're saying. So you might actually go to extra lengths to determine, are you understanding me? You may choose words carefully. You may confirm intended meaning and so on. So it does make a difference how important it is that your audience, that the people you're speaking with, do come away with your intended meaning. And so it's particularly important in this case that you select, so I can be speaking to my friend or to you, you select words that will either translate as you intend, or you translate words into words in the destination language that mean what you intend. And this is where hypocognition can really cause problems if you aren't exactly sure what the word is. So you choose one that seems like it makes sense to you, but to the other person, they say, what? Shoes? Yeah, whatever the case is. And you end up with this disconnect because the concept that you're trying to attach words or language to might be different across a cultural language or cultural language barrier. And you have to deal with that. And so it's important that it's important for your audience that it is important to you that they understand what you're trying to say. So more so if it's your family. At the same time, we hear the same things repeated over and over again thanks to social media. Everything is amplified and repeated. It's comical. And most of the time, words and their use washes over everyone. This is unfortunate that now we hear words and respond to them viscerally, perhaps, because the way they are used or the meaning to which they have been assigned has been manipulated for some other goal. There are too many, and I'm not going to go into politics, which I think I'm going to say soon anyway. I think I wrote that somewhere. The biggest problem, and we're coming to the end because this is Christmas and I don't want to talk for an hour, and my head cold is definitely challenging me. I got to tell you, I was feeling much better this morning and last night, so I'm thinking I'm coming to the end of this. It just kicked in Monday after I recorded my micro episode, my Buy Me an Update. Started feeling it. The biggest problem. This is sounding like an episode of FS Talk. If you've never heard FFS Talk, it's linked on my buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo profile. But we talk about things that work, things that do not, and how we can change them or what we can do about them. But I do encounter this hypocognition scenario more and more, and I wonder how this is even possible with so many tools at our disposal. There is literally no reason to not know the meaning of a word or various other facts. They're available online. Unfortunately, so are variations on facts and interpretations of facts. Given the title of this episode, you are probably not inclined to look up the meaning of hypocognition. But I find that most people are willing to let the presentation inform them rather than consulting other sources. You should do both. The availability heuristic and confirmation bias are real things. So if I had said hypocognition and you were like, yeah, I know what that means. I use that term all the time. Now, I'm not making fun of you if you do use it all the time. What I'm saying is confirmation bias and availability heuristic will make certain things appear familiar, and they may reinforce your impression of what the meaning was. And this, again, is in the Dunning presentation, linked at the top of this episode, at the beginning of the episode, and available in the episode description in the link section. It's an interesting watch. I mean, it's a little tiny bit boring in the middle, but basically people are convinced, convinced that they're familiar with these terms. And he literally he constructs a dozen terms, and 3 of them are completely made up, non-existent. But people are quite certain that they're familiar with those. So familiarity, if you just say it, if you verify that for yourself or in general, like, oh, those aren't real terms. Hypocognition is a real term. I provided a link that you can follow up on. One link in Wikipedia is not where you end your search for knowledge. It's a good beginning, though. So yeah, do both. The availability heuristic and confirmation bias are real things, as are dictionaries. The most interesting, and other research resources. The most interesting, or actually concerning, I suppose, aspect of all this is the way factions have formed around not really ideas, but the words describing ideas. Vague descriptions using words that we are familiar with, but may not be used in the same ways. I like to avoid politics, so let's just say that the next coming few months will likely be something or somewhat telling. The way language is used and mapped to meanings, I'm not trying to make a Jordan Peterson reference there, that may differ based on which hat one is wearing. In other words, there may be some surprises because one thing was said and a meaning was inferred, but then another action is taken. So we'll see. There may be some surprises on all sides. I think there will be several months of, is that what that was? Is that what was intended? Is that what the meaning was supposed to be? Oh, my sinuses are about to call the show. One more point and we're out. It is interesting that our current AI hype curve is being fueled by the training of large language models on every word ever recorded in any way, written, verbal, audio, whatever it is, verbal and audio, on the internets. So much so that there is not enough to train on. We have run out. Like, there used to be jokes that I've reached the end of the internet. Well, how did humans ever evolve? How do they know anything today? How can you speak? How can you possibly interact with your 2-year-old without nuclear reactors powering their consumption of every word ever uttered? I wonder. I've actually said this elsewhere. There's a complete lack of effort to make the AI hype energy efficient. Think about if anyone listening to this has had children, or if you've been around children, you are familiar with the fact that they learn, and they can eat a couple meals a day, 3, 4, probably more than 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever it is. Nutrition in the form of nutrient-rich foods. You do not need to power up 3 Mile Island. You do not need to dim the lights across most of the country and generate more heat than some stars for the purposes of consuming words that other people have said to train an algorithm that nobody understands. It's ludicrous. Anyway, when words are so often misused or misunderstood, we are now handing over the composition of prose to algorithms we do not understand, trained on words we may or may not be familiar with, to share ideas about which they, the algorithms, the chat clients, about which they know nothing but the words used to describe them, which may or may not be correct. Interesting times ahead. Always consult a dictionary. The internet is here for you. And for as long as it remains somewhat reliable in terms of facts, well, I don't know. We might be past that point. I was watching a Andrew Bustamante interview. Andrew Bustamante is the very, I'll just say crazy hair, because he's made reference that it's getting a little out of hand, but it's just a lot of hair. It's a lot of curly, long hair. He's a former CIA agent. His wife is also a CIA agent, was. They have a company together. I think it's called Everyday Spy. And he's on every podcast of it. He's probably going to be on this one eventually. And in this episode that I was watching earlier, he said journalism is hard to come by lately, but journalists actually, just like CIA agents, they have to get information from a source. They have to vet the source. They have to be, they have to do a background check on the source. They have to know what the source is telling them. They have to cross-reference it with other sources that they've also vetted. So the art of journalism requires a lot of effort and a lot of cross-referencing and a lot of checking and a lot of checking for veracity and checking for meaning and intent. So he likened it to a CIA agent. Now, he never mentions like, by the way, you should background check me, because he's an expert in everything. It boggles the mind how many things he knows. But he makes a good point. We should always be checking and following up on things. We should know what we're being told, what we're hearing. And when, as ChatGPT or O3 or whatever is coming out, and Gemini and Claude and Devin and Llama, all these things that have sort of nondescript names that sound very approachable. They should be named like Killer, Terminator, Arnold. If we trust the output of an AI model that has been trained on garbage, what will happen? What will become? So that's where I'm going to leave it right now. I wish you all happy holidays again. I believe I will go outside and see if I can get some fresh air into this head cold, which again is mostly the achiness is gone. So basically, the post illness joy and all that entails. On that note, again, happy holidays, and the next episode will, I believe, be on January 1st. So if you don't hear from me between now and then, Happy New Year. But there will be an episode on January 1st. That is Wednesday, right? Yeah. So our next episode, January 1st. In the meantime, don't forget to check out the Buy Me an Update. All these details and more about all the episodes and all the stuff. Take care. Bye-bye.